New Brunswick is a beautiful province located on the east coast of Canada. I actually spent a couple days there back in January just exploring around and seeing what the province had to offer, as I'd never been out that way. I ended up having a blast and I got up to some pretty fun things, so I thought I'd put together a list of my top 5 things to do in New Brunswick. Now, quick note, if you have the means, I would recommend against visiting New Brunswick in the winter. I mean, it was still a great time, like I said, I had a ton of fun, but being there in January, I'm fairly certain I was the only tourist in the province, and a lot of the places that I wanted to visit were closed. If you're given the choice, I would definitely recommend visiting in the summer. Starting our trip off, we're going to head to the city of St. John. Now, that's not to be confused with St. John's, Newfoundland. That's a completely different spot. We're talking about St. John, New Brunswick. I ended up staying in St. John throughout this whole trip, and every morning I'd wake up, go downstairs, and then head on over to one of the mini craft coffee shops in St. John for a morning coffee. I'd bring a book or do some work and just hang out and see what was going on in different parts of the city. Out of the couple different coffee shops that I visited, if I had to choose a favorite, I would probably say Catapult. They had a really nice seating area, the coffee was amazing, and it was the perfect place to just sit down and read a book. Aside from the coffee shops, St. John also has a really cool city market. Located right downtown, it's in this old wooden building. They have a ton of stalls and stands selling everything from fruit to tourist knickknacks. I ended up eating lunch here on most days. They have a huge variety of food, and the food was really good. And another thing that I loved about St. John was the nature that surrounds it. Since it's right on the coast, you have a beautiful view of the harbor. Then you have things like the Reversing Falls, which is a waterfall that actually changes direction depending on the time of day and where the tide is at. That's pretty cool. You have things like the Irving Nature Park, which has a beautiful beach and a ton of trails. Unfortunately, I didn't get to explore as it's the winter and all of the trails were iced over, but I've heard really good things. So yeah, after going through a couple of the different cities in New Brunswick, I definitely vibed with St. John the most, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Next up on our list, you have to check out the Midland Ice Caves if you're visiting in the winter. This is going to be the only spot on our list that is probably going to be better visited in the winter than it would be in the summer. The Midland Ice Caves are about 45 minutes from St. John, and they are not hard to find at all. You just plug it into Google Maps, drive your rental car there, you can park at the bottom, and then hike into the caves. The hike is fairly simple, it's very icy, so if you have spikes for your boots, I'd wear those, though I didn't and I survived, so there's that. After about a 40 or 45 minute hike, you'll see the ice caves inside of a ravine. They're super, super beautiful. If you want to get down to these caves, you're going to have to kind of traverse like sheer ice. I found it very difficult. I actually had to slide down on my butt at times, and it definitely wasn't the safest thing. Luckily, there was actually another group of tourists there. I know that if I had gone and I was the only person there, I probably would not have tried to get down to the ice caves, just for the sheer fact of if you hurt yourself, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So keep that in mind and be safe when you're visiting these caves. Next up, we're gonna make our way to the coast of New Brunswick, which is along the Bay of Fundy, and this is where we're going to see the next 3 spots on my top 5 list. Now, before we get into any of these spots, I need to tell you guys a bit about the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy separates New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and it's actually home to the highest tides in the entire world. Now, I mean, that may not sound super exciting. It's the highest tide in the world, like whoop-de-doo. But the reason I'm telling you guys is because it actually plays into the plans that we're gonna make. So whenever you're doing something in New Brunswick that's along the coastline, you really have to pay attention to the tidal charts. I'll link some in the description below, just so you know where the tide's going to be when you're visiting these places. With that being said though, our first stop on our Bay of Fundy excursion is going to be the St. Maarten Sea Caves, which I visited during low tide, and I recommend you do the same. Now, I wasn't expecting a whole lot when I'd heard about the St. Maarten Sea Caves, but I was blown away. These things are so cool. They are just massive. Being there during low tide meant that you could walk inside of the sea caves and see what's up, see the cave walls and the roof, and just how the ocean has carved out these caves along the coastline. You can spend definitely a good hour or 2 here just walking around and exploring. I really liked it. Now, ideally, I would have also gone back during high tide. I'll hopefully put a picture on screen, but the water goes like, it fills the caves almost completely, which is pretty insane. Like, that gives you an idea for the tide differential. So yeah, it's definitely a place that you would want to see during high tide as well if you have the chance. But I mean, I just couldn't make it work with the times that I was there. So whatever. If you can only choose one, I would go during low tide just so you can walk around in the caves. Moving on from the Sea Caves and heading further up the coastline of New Brunswick, we're going to head to the Fundy National Park. Now, if you guys have explored Canada at all, you know that Canada does not mess around with national parks. If they label something a national park, it's probably pretty beautiful. I honestly wish that I could show you guys more footage from the national park. I was only able to stop on some beaches and on the coastline, but I do know that the park has so much more to offer and I couldn't even scratch the surface. So if you're there during the summer, this is definitely a place you can spend a couple days. I would highly recommend it. The national park is a place that I would definitely spend some time. Now, our final spot and what is going to top off this list is probably going to be the most popular spot in New Brunswick, and that's going to be the Hopewell Rocks. Unfortunately, visiting in January once again has its downsides. The park is actually technically closed, but it's kind of an enter at your own risk thing. They've plowed out some parking spots with snowplows, so you can park outside of the gates and enter at your own risk. Just the trails and stuff are not maintained, so they don't want any liability. But there's tons of footprints, people do it, just be respectful. I was able to visit during the high tide, or what is a higher tide and what is a lower tide. It wasn't the maximum high tide and low tide, but I was able to check out both. The Hopewell Rocks are essentially just a group of rock formations. They're super unique. Just staring at them makes you so perplexed as to how these things happen and just how cool nature is. If you're there during low tide, you can actually walk on the beach, inspect these rock spires and tunnels and things like that. And then if you're there during high tide, you get to see the difference of when the water comes up. It almost covers some of them. And then there's lookouts that you can go to get different views of the rocks and stuff. And you can also kayak. Obviously I didn't because it's January, but if you're there during the summer, you can rent a kayak and go through all the rocks and stuff. It would be a very cool thing to do. And there it is, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video was able to give you some inspiration or some ideas for your next trip to New Brunswick. It honestly is a beautiful province, and I really hope to go back one day, hopefully during the summer months. Thank you again so much for watching, guys. I appreciate every single one of you so much, and I'll see you all in another one.